Howdy, folks, and welcome to another episode of Stanley and the Sea Can. Alrighty, what do we got today? Constantly ever-evolving firearms laws in Canada. I thought we'd go over some information that can be found on the RCMP website, but it's essentially how to store your firearms safely. So I think there's a big difference between what's safe and what's legal. So we should probably get into those weeds a little bit because, safe would be, no one can get it. No one knows where it is. It's obscured. It says it's that, it's hidden under the insulation in your attic or something like that. No one's ever going to find it except for you. But is that legal to do that? Well, let's dive into what the RCMP website says here. So there'll be a link below in this that'll show you where we found this information on the internet. But I would, check this occasionally as well because it probably changes every now and then or whenever they feel like it. So, as you probably know, there's roughly 3 classes of firearms that you might ever become exposed to in Canada, and that would be non-restricted, restricted, or prohibited. So on this table, we've got some non-restricteds and prohibited on here. So we can go over what's required for that. So storing a firearm is kind of like we're done at the range for the day. We're not cleaning it. We're not doing anything. We're not displaying it. We're just going to put it in a corner somewhere, put it in a gun safe somewhere and preserve it, I guess, for the next time that we're going to use it. For here, we have non-restricted firearms. So there's many different ways you can do this depending on your budget and things. So here we're showing a standard trigger lock. This one here looks like it has a key on it. So there's the key style trigger locks, and there's also the ever more popular kind of combination trigger locks. So you can have a 3-digit number that you can set to program, remember what it is, and then you can access those. So what that would do is essentially go through the trigger guard here. Ideally, you'd not want to put it in front of the trigger shoe because you could slide the whole thing back and still actuate the trigger. So you'd want to stick it behind the trigger on some sort of a firearm. So this guy here has a much bigger space. So inside of these trigger locks, like the spindle is probably the size of your baby finger, right? So you got to be able to get it behind the trigger so that you can't pull that trigger. Because if you put it in front, you can just slide the whole thing down the trigger guard here, which then would still allow it to fire, although not very efficiently, but it would do that. So for this firearm here, since you can't really get a trigger lock, those traditional styles behind the trigger, you'd have to do something else. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. We have a cable lock. So a cable lock, you can get them kind of the same way as the others. There's keyed versions and there's combination versions. So everyone loves the combination because then you don't have to try to worry about going to the range and forgetting to bring your the right set of keys. You just have a combination that you remember. Probably don't set it to 000 or 123, but yeah, any other numbers are probably pretty good you can use. So what this is showing here is looks like a firearm with a non-detachable floor plate, which is not possible. But this guy here has a little magazine. So we could run the cable up through here and have it come out of the ejection port, I guess, or loading port of the firearm. And the cable then would become continuous and wrapping around. So that way, if you had the bolt in it, you couldn't chamber the round because the thickness of that wire or that cable in there is going to prevent you from locking the lug. So it's kind of like you disabled it because you can't close the bolt. You can't close the bolt, you can't really fire the gun very well. So that's an option there. And a third option that's not really shown here that you can do is for lever guns. So this would be a lever action, right? We got some sort of a cool little lever action, a little mare's leg. And you can get something like this, which is a specific lever action type device that goes in here and clips on. So that way you can't actuate, you can't move the lever. You can't move the lever, you can't use the bolt. And so the firearm is disabled by our rules here. So this one here has that simple little key thing. It's almost like a little key with 2 little ears on the bottom that you can put into this screw. It's like a safety screw or safety bolt, I guess. Here you go. Here's what the key looks like. So they're all the same. There's nothing to it, and you could probably use anything. Use your jackknife in there somehow and spin it off. So does that meet the definition of like a safe storage trigger lock type thing? I don't know. I would think it should, but check with Runkle for that one. But it probably would also depend on whichever officer is around and finding you. So I typically, in my personal stuff, would avoid something like this, or even using a zip tie. Technically, it's some sort of a mechanical device, and technically you need a tool to remove it. But is it really as safe as having something like this with a combination lock on it or a key or something? So the answer is probably not. Rules apply differently for businesses and for shipping using regulated carriers. So sometimes you may buy a firearm and it may come with like a zip tie through the receiver, or it may come with one of these little chintzy things on there, or there may not be anything at all. It all depends on the store and how they shipped it to you and how they provided it to you. If you walk into a store like your local corner gun shop, and you buy a firearm and walk out the front door with it, they'll have different rules and they'll instruct you on what you need to do and how you can walk out. So it'll probably be in a box or in a bag or something, a garbage bag or anything, so that it's not obvious that you're walking down the street with a firearm. Though it's technically legal to do that in some places, in some situations, as long as it's not loaded and all these other things, it is going to draw some attention to you and most likely in a very negative way. So it's just not something that we would normally do. We're talking about other things you could do. So if you don't want to have all your firearms with trigger locks and such in the house, and there's exceptions to everything, of course, but let's just stick to the most basic things. He says you can use a lockable container. So these like plastic foam gun containers that you can get. Sometimes firearms will come shipped in them, and get you a picture of one of those in a second. And then the other option is some sort of a safe or a box. So here's your official rules, I guess, right? Attach a secure locking device such as a trigger lock, cable lock, or remove the bolt. So then this firearm here doesn't have its bolt in it. It's been removed from the back of it. So I guess based on these rules here, I could have this leaning up in the corner of my bedroom. No magazine, no ammunition, nothing like that. It's just literally a tube. It's a pipe, and it's got a piece of wood and some snazzy spray paint on there. And that would meet the definition because the bolt is removed and locked somewhere else. We could use some sort of a metal box, metal safe. All sorts of stores sell those things from various degrees. You can get like really cheap tin boxes for $100 with safety screws putting it together. You get riveted, welded boxes, and all the way up to like fire rated safes, depending on what you're doing or what other things you're storing in there. So some people might store documents like your will or your social insurance numbers and things inside of there. So you'd want a fireproof safe or all of those items in a fireproof bag. But if it's just for firearms, any sort of metal box is going to be good, right? So the firearms cannot be fired. So that kind of comes back to these concepts of the trigger locks and even the lever action lock, like I said. So basically the firearm cannot be fired when it's loaded up. And of course, before we put anything away, we're going to prove it's safe and make sure it's definitely not got a cartridge in it. Yeah. So the other interesting option here is so lock your firearms in a cabinet or a container or a room that is difficult to break into. So what's difficult to break into? That's up to the discretion if someone was to come and look at it, right? So would that be a bathroom, a spare bathroom that you don't use with a hollow core door that you could just kind of punch your way right through it? Probably not, right? But could it be an old, unused cold cellar that's under your front porch, which is essentially a concrete box with a nice metal door on it? Maybe, right? Or here in my shop, the whole shop is a secured building, and then inside of that there's a C-can, which is where we're in right now, Stanley in the C-can. And so we're in the C-can, which has big locking doors and locking lugs. So if you were to try to get in here, you'd need to defeat the C-can. So it's relatively thick, tough metal on the walls, and there's big locks on the doors and all this kind of stuff. So that definitely meets the requirements of a container or a room. So it's essentially a cabinet, but it's also a room because it's so big. So one interesting thing here is when it comes to the prohibited and restricted firearms, so many of us now are now in possession of prohibited firearms with all these crazy gun bans that keep going on. So you may not even have a restricted license, yet you're in legal possession of a prohibited firearm. So what do you do? How does that storage differ from a non-restricted? So essentially it's kind of the same things, but now you need to double everything up. So you've got attach and secure a locking device so that the firearms cannot be fired, and it's not or, but it's and lock them in a cabinet or container or room that's difficult to break into. So that means if you have your metal gun safe at home, you put a trigger lock or cable lock, whatever on it, then throw that whole package into the gun safe or your gun vault or whatever you want to call it. And then you can lock the firearms in a vault, safe, or a room that was built or modified specifically to store firearms safely. So that's talking about, upgrading and making sure that it's hard to break into. We're not having hollow core doors where you can just kick through, push through, whatever. It's some sort of proper upgraded metal room. You can sometimes see on, Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji, old bank vault doors and things like that. So I've seen that done before where people will mount something like that in a basement cellar room that's all cement or cinder blocks or whatever. So it's like a cement room with a metal door, serious locking metal door to become a gun room. So that would be the rules for your ARs, your WKs, all these beautiful firearms that were purpose-built for hunting and civilian use that have been taken away from us as evil military weapons. And then automatics you probably won't see, but they are like this. The only kind of additional thing is you need to also remove the bolts of the bolt carriers. So that's going to become a whole new can of worms if and when the government decides that they want to do this alleged, buyback on our firearms here. So they're going to tell you to ship them somewhere, but how do you ship them? Do you have to ship them with the bolt and the bolt carrier in it or out of it? They're going to tell you just to ship it. They're not going to say anything about the bolt and the carrier, but if they don't get a complete firearm, they're not going to pay you. So you got to find some interesting, clever ways to work around that. So we'll have a video on that at some point in the future. But yeah, essentially you just kind of follow the same thing. So if this is a full auto Papa-Shaw, let's call it. So a nice little baby gun. So we would just, we're going to push it, take it apart. This whole bolt assembly with, this is the bolt. It would pop out, take it all out. And then we would still have to put a trigger lock or a cable lock up through the action so that it couldn't close or anything else, and then still lock this in a normal safe in your house, which is something that most of you probably don't have to deal with. Yeah, so that kind of in a nutshell covers the safe storage of firearms in Canada based on what we know on early May 2025. Could change tomorrow, but that's where we're at today. Okay, thanks so much. And just like Grandma always says, if someone asks how many guns you have, they mean in total, not on you right now.